We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're talking about the 2022 version of the Farmers Almanac. It is a neat publication. If you're not familiar with it, tune in. If you are, hey, I want to hear some of the things maybe that you wonder about that might be written in Farmers Almanac. Pete Geiger is with us. He is the editor of the Farmers Almanac up in Maine. It's good to have you with us. You know, it's interesting. There's a Tennessee connection popping up in everything somehow, somewhere. And we were talking about how you have recipe contests, and actually there's a third place winner here in a sweet potato category. Posted here, third place winner, sweet potato chipotle biscuits, Lisa Benoit of Cookeville, Tennessee. And I mention her only because it's in the recent edition, but years ago, I know Rick Casepier here, you know, with us on the program, the executive producer of this show, sent you a recipe from a dearly departed friend who used to follow this program, who recently died, Winona Lurie, who sent us a recipe for a sauerkraut chocolate cake. Do you remember us forwarding that to you?
Listen, I want to tell you, Rick sent that to me a couple weeks ago, her obituary.
Yeah.
And we haven't talked in, what, 20 years or so. I remember, not only do I remember Winona and the recipe, but I remember her phone call, because it was a call-in program. I remember her calling in, and she was so enthusiastic. So I said, that sounds interesting. So I said, send me the recipe. So she did. So then Sandy Duncan, my managing editor, and I decided we were going to survey my employees and see what are the favorite desserts. We should have a national favorite dessert for America. So we had all these things: apple pie, cheesecake, and so forth.
Oh, yeah.
And then we went to a farmer's market, and we had bands playing, and we had food being passed out, and we had people voting. So I was the write-in candidate for chocolate sauerkraut cake as the all-American dessert. And Winona was just lovely, and I actually did that recipe on a TV show in Maine, maybe so many years later, and I ended up getting 11 votes that it was the all-American dessert.
Yeah.
Because my speech was, what's more American than cabbage, and certainly that's what. You know,
well, I can see. I'm glad she got some votes, because it is delicious. But people hear it and they think, oh my gosh, a sauerkraut with chocolate cake, that sounds awful. The point being, as you discovered, you don't taste it; it just makes the cake really moist.
Yes, exactly. And so really, that was sort of one of the things one of the programs, and I've done thousands of programs, I remember the most was her calling in, her sending me the recipe, and then Rick sending me her obituary, and I'm sorry that she's gone, but boy, she had to be one hoot, because that led to having a contest. So we have a first, second, third place with cash prizes, and I used my local high school culinary arts program, which is absolutely the best in the state, and they help us judge it. So before, we had to buy the food, go home, make it, bring it in, and it was just very cumbersome. So now I take like 200 recipes, and I have the staff at the culinary arts program, it's called Green Ladle, judge like 200 and bring it down to like 6 or 7. Then we bring in arts judges, and we bring in some students. Each student makes each of the items, and then we judge it, and it's done so professionally. And then we publish the best 3. So last year it was sweet potatoes. This year coming up is honey, and you mentioned earlier about the honey item in the almanac. So this year, as long as there's 2 tablespoons of honey in a recipe, I would ask you to submit it to us. It has to be done electronically now. Before, we were getting handwritten, and it was a little dicey reading some of this stuff. So, but you go to farmersalmanac.com or go to the Almanac. It'll tell you how to do it, and then we have a cash prize. But thrilled to death that Lisa's. In fact, all of the sweet potatoes were amazing. I mean, I didn't even like sweet potatoes until I started eating this, and it's just great. So recipes have always been a part of the Almanac, and this is just one that I love.
I think it's great, and I'm at the section right now where it says, here's the buzz, and you know, you've got I think the Almanac is so much fun and so interesting, but you also have a social conscience and environmental conscience, and I'm a beekeeper, and we know that there are problems and issues with beekeeping, and you have a section here, honeybees need your help, and here's why, and you talk about why bees are in crisis and what people can do to try to foster, you know, bees, which are, you know, crucial pollinators for everything we eat. It's a great entire section on honeybees. I think it's awesome.
You know, a couple of my friends, probably, you know, in their early 40s or so, were on my website the other day, probably a year ago, and they saw something about chickens, so they decided to get 5 chickens and to raise them. And so now they're raising these chickens, and in their kitchen they have all these chicken eggs, all these eggs that are sitting on the counter. So they don't have to be put in the refrigerator when they're right from the chicken and or the hens, and so you can go to my website and you can figure out what to do with chickens, how to raise chickens, and sometimes you just want to be more self-sufficient. I think in the area of food, gardening in particular is interesting because we've had all these fires out west. I have no idea what that's going to do to the food supply. And then you hear about tainted foods. And I really think, take a stab at trying to grow something. You don't have to be growing everything, and you certainly can't grow citrus fruits that you might in California, but you can grow foods in your backyard or in your apartment, and it's fun to try. And I think as a family, it's fun if you have children, because then the children get involved. And sometimes schools. I'm on the State Board of Education in Maine. Many of our schools have gardens, and they use it as a hands-on learning experience.
I just think it's awesome. Let's take a call or two. We'll go start off with Joe. Joe, good morning. Hi, Joe.
Good morning, Nick. This gentleman was very interesting, and I grew up with my grandfather, and he was born in grew up in the 1800s, and I used to listen to him. He had farm animals and all kinds of stuff, and I was very interested in it. He would read the Farmers Almanac, and it was very interesting to listen to the stories he would tell and about the animals and
Sure.
the weather, because back then there wasn't any TV and stuff, and you didn't get much information. You just kind of went. He would kind of get up in the morning and pretty well tell you what he felt like the day was going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was going to be cold, rainy, or hot, or whatever. So,
Well, Joe, hey, Joe.
these young people would spend a little bit more time.
What was that? Yeah.
Well, hey, Joe. Hey, first of all, thanks for calling in. And what Sandy and I like to say is, it wasn't grandparents that read the almanac. It was young families that use the almanac, and so it isn't just older people that read it. Here's an almanac from 1876, and this is what an almanac looked like back in those days. So it isn't just for old people to read, but I think the point Joe makes is that people made observations about what was going on around them. You mentioned the persimmon plant, and if you take the persimmon plant, open it up, take a seed, you cut it in half, and inside that seed you're going to find it to be either a shape of a fork, which means a mild winter, a knife, which means a bitter cold winter, or a spoon, which means a heavy snow winter. So one thing you can do, and people, as Joe said, you didn't have anything to watch, so they watched what was going on around them. And so that's what's so interesting about the almanac, is that we make some of those observations of how people observe, and that helps you prepare for whatever you want to prepare for. So I want to make it clear that it isn't just for older people. I like to think that the almanac is for younger people or young families who read it and react to it. So I appreciate the call, Joe.
Yeah, I just wonder, how do you square it then? You mentioned the persimmon seed and the shape of inside the seed if you cut it open, indicating a weather, and then the woolly worm and the things like that. I mean, how do you square that with the science that we know exists with our weather team just in the studio next door, where they have some of these high-tech, computers and, weather evaluators over there with technology?
Sure.
How do you square that and the accuracy, or just, who discovered this with a persimmon seed?
Yeah. Well, this was probably discovered 100 years ago or 200 years ago. These things were discovered long before anything else came along. And to the credit of the local weather person, they're not going to go more than 10 days out. So what happened was, back in, let's say, the 1870s, people had to observe what the animals were doing, whether squirrels were gathering more acorns early, the woolly bear cat. They looked at these things because that was an indicator of what the winter was going to be. And even today, the scientists can't really tell you what is going to be much more than 10 days out. Maybe they can do better than that. I don't know. But if you're going to get married next September, a year from now, where are you going to go? Well, the almanac has predictions for the entire 2022. We actually have 2023 almanac weather for next year's almanac in the house. So I don't like to poo-poo the fact that people observed things, because quite frankly, that's how they lived and that's how they survived, and seemed to work very well for them. Actually, if you go to my farmersalmanac.com website and you put in 20 signs of a hard winter or a hard winter, it'll pop up 20 signs that people used to follow in advance of winter. And we sort of poo-poo all that kind of stuff now, which is really too bad. We like to push a button and have the answer, but there is no such thing, particularly when it comes to weather.
Yeah, you know what? I couldn't agree with you more, and it made me just think about something about the elements of Farmers Almanac I like so much, is that in this day and age, for a lot of good reasons, though, you're right. People, they're online, it's all technology, and that's fine, but you're usually in your computer or your phone. And what you're talking about here, what we see here, are actual observations that people make, maybe through either their own personal experience, by actually seeing something out in the environment, smelling something, hearing something, and observing it over time, and then documenting it. And to me, over a period of time, that is going to be far more accurate than anything I get off my cell phone that was just calculated within the last 10 minutes. And I just think that there's a place for both of that. But I think you really hit it on the head. And I do worry about this in terms of the younger generation. This includes my young son. I mean, could I get him to sit down and read this right now? Maybe if there was something in there that caught his fancy, and I know there would be, but I don't know if he'll give it the shot, because they're all so ingrained on technology.
Well, you'll be surprised how many people tell me that their 7-year-old or 8-year-old actually reads it cover to cover. I got a friend up in up almost on the Canadian border, and her grandchild, the first thing when the child gets to her house, she grabs the almanac to read
awesome.
it. So I mean, whatever. I mean, do people read not like they used to?
Right.
We have a whole series of really great videos. By the way, I've got this dream team that puts the almanac together. I'm just the talking head at this point, but I've got people doing videos on gardening, just some fun stuff, something on a zucchini, dropping a zucchini on your neighbors. Just, if you go to the site, enjoy, you know, it was you know, drop a zucchini on your neighbor day or something. We just made it up, but it was fun. And there's so much tension and sadness right now that the brand, the Farmers Almanac, is really about enjoying life and being a survivor, I guess. And years ago, it was when there was a bad economy, and so how do you save money? Now it's more like, I think this generation is going to be so focused on how to repurpose things and to reuse things, and not to throw the plastic away, and to do things in a smart way. They're going to have to, because quite frankly, if they don't, you know, the end is imminent, I guess. I don't sound horrible, but you know, this next generation, I think, is going to be much more focused on that type of thing than certainly my generation, who grew up in the 60s, who threw things away, used it, threw it away.
They're going to have no choice but to do that. I think you're right. And listen, and I do agree. But when you read the almanac, it's just full of positive stuff. Is what I like. I mean, so we're going to take a break, but I'm just sitting here reading this column on making your own vinegar. I got to give that a shot. There's other stuff in here. We'll take more calls and any of your comments. If you have a question or you want to bounce something off him about something you've heard that maybe was passed down through your family or your grandmother, or, you know, something like that, I'm just guessing Peter Geiger's probably heard about it. We'll take a break and be back with more on the Farmers Almanac right after this. Stay with us.